When I started to write my first college paper, I realized pretty quickly that I had no idea how to write a college paper. Like, after a lot of knuckle biting procrastination, I just sort of wrote what I could and then I turned it in and waited for the feedback. And when that feedback came, I was disturbed. I remember it like it was yesterday. There were huge slashes of red all over the page, lone question marks squiggled in the margins, and worst of all, there were comments, lots of comments I didn't understand or find helpful. Like, for example, after one sentence, my instructor drew an arrow and wrote, "This is, of course, wrong." And I thought, "Of course? What do you mean, of course? I wrote that sentence. I can't see what's wrong here. Am I stupid?" And it wasn't just that I had written a bad paper and gotten a bad grade. I knew the paper was bad when I wrote it. What really sucked was that I couldn't figure out from the feedback how to make the writing better. And many people, whether they're in school or writing for their work, have had this experience. Later on, I went to graduate school to study writing, where I learned that making use of feedback is a teachable skill. No one knows what to do with feedback naturally. They have to learn how to convert comments on their writing into actionable advice. This video is about that process. For me, the way to make use of feedback revealed itself when I read a really old book by a man named Quintilian called On the Education of the Orator. In that book, the ancient master writes this: "Of correction, there are three ways: to add, to remove, and to alter." Now, that might not seem super profound, but Quintilian is saying that whatever someone may say about something you've written, there are, in the end, only three ways to improve it: by adding something, subtracting something, or changing something that's already there. The key to making use of feedback is translating the comments of others into one of these actions. So, for example, someone recently said this about one of my scholarly articles: "The writer doesn't engage deeply enough with the research literature on this topic." Like a lot of less than helpful feedback, this comment is phrased as an assertion, not as advice. It doesn't tell me what to do. In fact, when I first read it, I found it intimidating. I thought, doesn't engage deeply enough. Is my writing like shallow, or is it superficial, or is it weak? Have my worst nightmares come true? But when I remembered that this feedback can only be telling me to do one of three things, I realized that the advice behind this assertion was simply to add more quotes and references to scholarly sources. It was hard to understand what deep engagement might look like, but it was easy to know when I had cited more sources. Now, translating comments like this takes some skill, but there are strategies to help you do it. To summarize these strategies, I, being a creative genius, have invented ALDA, the Helpful Feedback Pirate. ALDA's name stands for the process you must go through in order to make use of feedback. First, you've got to absorb the feedback. We often feel, for whatever reason, tender about our writing. Criticism of it can feel like criticism of us. The first obstacle, therefore, is our extreme emotional reaction to feedback. We have to take time to absorb it, to receive its impact patiently and calmly. Perhaps we need to read the comments and step away for a while. Perhaps we need to remind ourselves that most people who give feedback on writing were never properly trained to do so, which is why I'm making a video about how to give helpful feedback next. Whatever we need to do, absorption is not an optional step. If you don't absorb, the process of revision will stall and you won't end up with better writing. After absorbing, you need to locate the problems the feedback is pointing to. For example, the comment I already showed you, "The writer doesn't engage deeply enough with the research literature," was pretty clearly focused on the introduction of my paper. But it soon became clear that the comment was actually focused on a section of my introduction and maybe just one paragraph within that introduction section. Locating the problems, zeroing in on them, saves you from the vague sense that your writing sucks. Here's another example. Sometimes a sentence or a paragraph will be highlighted, and there will be one word, vague, or two words, be specific, or a few words, the writing could be sharper here. At first, this sort of thing is insultingly unhelpful. They might as well have written me no like in the margin. But after absorbing the comment, you can work to turn their emotional reaction into practical advice by saying, okay, where is the vagueness in this sentence or paragraph? Vagueness usually comes down to individual word choice. For example, the sentence, Bill Gates is rich, can only be vague in the second half. Bill Gates is the name of an individual person. Nothing could be more specific than the name of an individual person. But rich is a relative term. Rich in America is different from rich in Niger. So once I see where the vagueness is located, I can more easily revise to fix it. Bill Gates' net worth is $100 billion. After locating the issue, you can decide what to do. Because Alda's a pirate, she has some advice on how to do that. R. R stands for the options that you have for dealing with feedback on your writing. The first three letters stand for add, remove, and revise, just as Quintilian explained. The fourth letter stands for relocate, which is a combo of removing and adding. So, if you get a comment that says, our readers are more interested in the human side of stories rather than the statistical side, you can boil that down to adding more content about individual people's struggles and removing some numbers, charts, and references to studies or something like that. If someone says, the tone of this sentence is standoffish, you will need to locate the words that give it that tone and revise the sentence to make it sound more friendly. If in your first paragraph you use the name of a concept or person and the reader comments, who is that? Or what? You might need to relocate a later explanation of that concept or person to the beginning of the piece. If someone says, but have you considered what so-and-so says about this topic? You might consider adding a couple of sentences where you name that person and interact with what they've said, and so on. If you have a lot of comments, it can be helpful to have a list of actions to take later, like this one. But sometimes there are comments which, after you've absorbed them and located the issues they're describing, the comments seem to be off base, or unwise, or impossible to implement. Sometimes changes you've made in response to other comments make this particular comment obsolete. Sometimes you may decide that feedback is flat out wrong. In those cases, you can reject the comment and change nothing in response to it. Now, it's still crucial to go through the steps of absorption and location before rejecting comments, since all kinds of emotions are wrapped up in writing and responding to feedback. Rejecting without absorbing is the definition of defensiveness, which is the death of improvement in your writing. But never rejecting is the hallmark of a writer who doesn't know who they are. So, stay calm and contend with the feedback. There are a couple of other ways to make use of feedback that I want to mention. First, sometimes comments can be made clearer if you add the name of the commenter and rephrase the note in the form of a question. So, for example, if you get a comment like the one I got on my first paper in college, this is, of course, wrong. You might ask, what might Dr. So-and-so find wrong about this? Given what I know about them, what might this comment really mean? If someone writes irrelevant in the margin of your writing, you could ask, why would so-and-so find this irrelevant? Second, sometimes feedback is given on writing that you will never touch again. Like maybe the feedback comes at the same time as the grade on the paper, and there is no opportunity to revise or some other situation like that. In these cases, you should still get what you can out of the feedback for future writing. To do this, open a document or grab a notepad and write a series of in the future statements in response to the comments. So if a comment says, this essay doesn't follow the assignment, you can write, in the future, pay extra attention to the assignment instructions. If someone says the lack of a transition sentence here makes the writing feel jarring, you can write, in the future, be sure to include transition sentences. And once you've got a half page full of in the future statements, you can have them next to you as you write your next paper or design your next document for that person or group. After absorbing, locating, and deciding, act. You may not believe me, but the act of revision is probably the most fun part of writing. It's the moment when you realize that you can make your writing better without feeling powerless and bad at it. You experience the good feelings of making use of feedback that come after the bad feelings of absorbing feedback in the first place. Over time, because you've learned to make use of it, feedback can become a welcome moment in your writing process, a time when you escape the prison of self-judgment and get opinions from actual readers. So that's the advice from Quintilian, the ancient master, and Alda, the feedback pirate. Absorb, locate, decide between adding, removing, revising, relocating, and rejecting, and then act.